He built a better life for himself after tragedy.
He actually saw his father get murdered. He went into law enforcement to put a closure to that.
He found comfort by helping others.
He had a huge sense of family. He loved the togetherness of family. He just had this joyful spirit about himself.
A new love seemed to be the final piece of the puzzle.
It was more than just friendship.
It was a whirlwind romance.
But a vicious crime ended their future together.
She saw him laying there in a pool of blood.
He didn't deserve this.
Was this a crime of opportunity?
All of the rooms had been ransacked.
They think he walked in on a robbery.
Erica, what are you doing?
Or was his killer driven by a personal vendetta?
So you gonna go back to him?
She had an ex who was back in the picture.
There was always concern, was there some type of revenge involved in this?
You always have a choice. Just remember there's always consequences.
January 29th, 2016. It's a Friday afternoon in Pembroke Pines, Florida, a peaceful and diverse suburb of Miami.
Pembroke Pines is a beautiful place. Crime is very low.
It's a multicultural area, has a lot of people of Caribbean descent.
Around 5 o'clock, Barbara Drummond arrives at her son's apartment complex to check on him after learning he didn't show up for work that day.
Her son was 40-year-old Davon Hall, who worked as a corrections officer at the Miami-Dade County Jail.
Barbara initially suspects her son may have just slept through his alarm.
I saw his car, and I'm like, but his car is here.
Dave, are you in there?
I didn't hear an answer, so something said to me, try the door. So I pushed the door, and it was not locked.
Right inside the apartment, Davion's mother is met with a horrifying sight.
When she walks in, she sees him laying face down. Dave! It was like he just walked in and he had his exercise bag still on his back. So I'm thinking that I wonder if he passed out.
As Barbara takes a closer look, her worst fears are realized.
I'm looking to see some kind of breathing, and I saw nothing. I said, wow, I think my son is dead. I started bawling, and I'm like, oh God, what am I to do? What am I to do?
Barbara shakily pulls out her phone and begins dialing.
I call 911 and I'm talking, of course I'm crying. Somebody help me, please. She was screaming and screaming. Help me, please.
It was blood-curdling.
As Barbara tries to regain her composure, she can only imagine how her beloved son ended up this way.
I'm confused. My mind is gone all over.
Originally from Jamaica, Davon Hall had immigrated with his family to the suburbs of Miami, Florida, when he was just 6 years old.
His father's family were already here, and we came because we thought it would have been a better opportunity here for so many things.
Growing up in South Florida's diverse immigrant community, Davon learned to tackle any challenge life threw at him.
He was always smiling, loving, but very, very energetic. He had a huge sense of family. He loved the togetherness of family.
But after just a few happy years in Florida, Davion's family was ripped apart by tragedy.
He actually witnessed his father being murdered.
It was a home invasion, and he was there.
Davon was just 10 years old at the time.
At such a young age, Davon learned that some killers escape justice.
Police never found his father's killer.
I think it traumatized him to a certain degree.
and it was something that he feared.
But in his adulthood, Davon turned that fear into action.
When things like this happen, we can take one path that will lead us one way or another path that will lead us down another road. Davon chose the higher road. There was still something in him that led him to want to serve others.
After coming home from college, Davon became a corrections officer.
He was a very good officer. He took care of his unit and he managed his inmates very well.
I think that his interest in law enforcement stemmed a lot from his father being killed as a way to cope with what happened.
I think he went into law enforcement to put a closure to that.
Working in law enforcement wasn't the only way Davon served his community.
As busy as he was, he still found the time to mentor young men.
He took on basketball coaching, which is a great leadership position.
Where he lived, there were a number of black young men there, and they didn't have a father in the household.
He was a great role model for them and showed them career paths they could take to better themselves.
The kids have to be engaged in something. So that's what he did with them. He mentored and trained them.
Through it all, he still found time for himself.
Davon loved working out.
He worked out twice a day sometimes.
But even though Davon stayed busy with his work and mentorships, he still tried to make time for love.
I think Davon knew that he was very attractive. He was a handsome guy.
He was a single man. He had a good career. He had a lot of whatever the ladies were attracted to.
He had his pick of the ladies.
In early January 2016, one particular woman caught Davon's eye.
When he moved into his apartment in Pembroke Pines, he noticed that he had a neighbor that was very attractive.
Her name was Erica Brooks.
Hello. I'm Dave. I just moved in.
I'm Erica. Welcome to the neighborhood.
They had taken some sort of interest in one another, a liking in each other.
The sparks were almost immediate.
We should hang out sometime.
Yeah, I love that.
The relationship quickly progressed to the next level.
Davon and Erica started having long conversations, started hanging out.
It didn't take long for the other neighbors to notice they were an item. And it was getting pretty serious, even after only dating each other for a few weeks.
But unfortunately, the couple's budding relationship would be cut short. On January 29th, Davon's mother has just found her son unresponsive in his apartment.
911 receives a call from Davon's mother, frantically screaming in the phone, saying that she thinks that her son is dead.
Help me, please. It was just a shock.
Within minutes, first responders arrive on the scene.
Once EMT arrived, they did confirm that Davon was deceased.
Based on the condition of the body, first responders surmised that Davon had likely died earlier that day and had been deceased for at least 5 hours.
Davon Hall was shot.
And as police begin processing the scene, it will become abundantly clear that this was no accident.
The entire apartment had been ransacked.
There was most likely a robbery taking place. They panicked, and they shot him.
In the winter of 2016, everything was going right for Miami area corrections officer Davon Hall.
He's a man that enjoyed life, handsome, smart.
He's got himself a new apartment and a very pretty neighbor.
What you got going on here?
He and his neighbor Erica Brooks had hit it off and quickly started dating.
But on January 29th, police have responded to Davon's apartment after a chilling 911 call from his mother, Barbara Drummond.
Somebody help me, please!
She found Davion unresponsive in his apartment.
We have one deceased male, start major crimes, and medical examiner.
Investigators are quickly able to determine the cause of death.
They can see that he's been shot at least 4 times.
One shot was in his torso, the rest were around his neck and face.
He was still in his gym clothes, and he actually still had his gym bag on his shoulder.
They suspect that whoever killed Davion surprised him when he returned home from the gym between 12:30 and 1:30 p.m.
Definitely looks like he got ambushed right as he came through the door.
Police surmise that whoever shot Davion made sure to cover their tracks.
What do you got?
We haven't been locating any shell casings inside or outside.
That means the shooter must have took it with them or used a revolver to commit the crime.
There are also signs that the killer tried to destroy forensic evidence.
Look at that.
They noticed right away that just a few feet from Davion's body is a bottle of bleach.
That indicates the killer tried to clean up the crime scene.
And as investigators continue processing the scene, a possible motive comes into focus.
The apartment had been ransacked.
Things are pulled out of the drawers. You can tell that it's been gone through.
So it looked like somebody was searching for something.
Could Davion have stumbled across a burglar in the act?
There weren't any signs of forced entry to the door, but all other signs point to some sort of an intruder.
There was most likely a robbery taking place, and he just happened to get home while the robbers were there. They panicked, and they shot him.
The theory is reinforced when detectives interview Davion's mother, Barbara.
I'm sorry I have to tell you this, but your son was shot multiple times.
I can't believe it.
Barbara also believes the crime had to have been the result of some sort of robbery attempt.
Did he happen to have anything that was particularly valuable?
He had guns.
We are talking a large gun collection, not just his service weapons, but he also had an AR-15.
He would mention that his father wasn't able to protect himself. So he always felt like, even in his home, he would show me, like, tell me, like, hey, you know, I keep a gun here, I keep a gun here, you know, just in case. But the way that he passed was similar to the way that he lost his father. So it was very eerie.
Instead of providing protection, had Davion's guns gotten him killed?
The only thing that was taken were his collection of guns.
Whether this was a random or targeted attack, it sounds like those guns were exactly what the intruder were after.
But who took them? Barbara assures detectives that her son didn't have any enemies.
She was absolutely adamant that basically everyone who knew him loved him.
If he had any beef with anybody, he would have told me about it.
He didn't mention anything when I talked to him on the phone. His mother had just talked to Davion the day before. She indicated that he was happy.
He seemed to be his normal self, didn't seem like anything was concerning him or bothering him.
Despite what Barbara says, detectives wonder if perhaps Davion's work as a corrections officer could have something to do with his death.
His job put Davion in direct contact with some of the worst criminals in South Florida.
Could this be some kind of grudge from work?
The detectives assure Davion's mother that they won't rest until her son's killer is brought to justice.
Detective Katz said, Miss Drummond, I am going to find who killed your son. He's one of us, and we're going to solve this.
But before detectives can continue their investigation, one of Davion's neighbors approaches them.
She said she heard some sort of loud altercation coming from Davion's apartment about a week before he was shot.
Erica, what are you doing?
She noticed raised voices and the woman who was very agitated and upset and shouting, and then ultimately the woman stormed out.
The neighbor says the woman was Erica Brooks, who also lives in the complex.
It had become pretty common knowledge around the apartment complex that Davon and Erica were dating.
They flirted with each other. They clearly enjoyed being with each other. They started sort of a whirlwind romance.
And now detectives wonder, did this whirlwind turn into a violent tornado?
It's possible that the argument between Erica and Davon had something to do with his murder.
Detectives needed to find Erica Brooks right away.
Homicide detectives in Pembroke Pines, Florida, have just learned that shooting victim Davon Hall had gotten into an explosive argument with his new girlfriend, Erica Brooks, just 1 week before his untimely death.
The timing is certainly suspicious.
And she lives right there.
So now detectives are curious and they want to talk to this Erica. Maybe she has some answers.
Unfortunately, getting a hold of Erica will be easier said than done.
They knock on her door, no answer. They call, it goes to voicemail. Erica is nowhere to be found.
But detectives do make another discovery that piques their interest.
There were surveillance cameras around the building.
Definitely need that footage.
They were able to obtain the camera footage from the apartment complex manager.
The next morning, detectives begin poring over the footage.
They're hoping that this surveillance will give them a clear shot of Davon's killer entering and exiting his apartment.
They notice a particular camera that's aimed right at the sidewalk that goes right towards Davon's front door.
However, to detectives' disappointment, the camera angle is just slightly off from where they need it to be.
Though they could see the sidewalk in front of Davon's apartment, they could not see the front door itself.
Regardless, detectives still see something in the footage that catches their attention. The video shows two men walking in the direction of Davon's apartment just moments before police believe he was murdered.
They both had very distinct clothes on, which was captured on surveillance cameras.
One was wearing a red hoodie, one was wearing a black hoodie. Their faces were obscured.
After the two men walk out of frame in the direction of Davon's front door, they don't appear anywhere else in the surveillance.
They must have left in the other direction away from the camera.
Could these two mystery men be Davon's killers?
Detectives are once again wondering if Davon could have been the victim of a couple of angry cons who knew where he lived.
We had a corrections deputy that was found deceased, and we had concerns as to, was this something that was related to his job?
Detectives give Davon's supervisor at the correctional facility a call.
They want to know, was there some type of run-in, maybe, with an inmate, where there was a history there?
But Davon's supervisor tells detectives that Davon had an excellent reputation with the inmates.
He wasn't one of those officers that came in and ruled with an iron fist. He was more calm and laid back with the inmates.
He was known for being fair and firm. Just like he mentored people in the community, he also mentored the inmates.
Inmates echo Davon's co-workers.
When people are in law enforcement, it can go either way. Some people kind of take it as a moment to use the power that they have, and other people choose to use their power, but in a better way. And Davon was a person who never used the fact that he was a correctional officer against the inmates. He still treated them like people, and I think they respected him for that.
Detectives even talked to one inmate who's heartbroken by Davon's murder.
There was an inmate waiting to be sentenced to life in prison. And when he found out about Dave's death, he was just bawling like a baby.
He was about 18 or 19 years old. He had no chance of getting out of prison. He had a double life sentence. So there was no chance that he was gonna get out of prison. In spite of this, Davon somehow helped him transform his mind so that he wanted to become a better person. Even though he knew he'd never get out of prison, he still wanted to become a better man.
He told me that he was teaching one of the inmates to read and write. And he said if there was any brawl in the facility, once he shows up and he said, come on guys, what's going on? It would stop. He said they are human beings just like anybody else.
Davion's supervisor says Davon was cautious with the inmates too.
He said that there's absolutely no way that Davon would let the inmates know about his gun collection.
After speaking with Davion's supervisor, detectives feel like they're back at square one.
They still have no leads as to who the two mystery men are in the surveillance video, or who would have wanted to target Davon.
But they catch a break when Davion's girlfriend, Erica Brooks, finally surfaces.
Detectives, Erica Brooks to see you.
Okay.
Detectives wanted to speak to Erica after learning that she and Davon had gotten into an argument the week earlier.
Erica apologizes for not contacting them sooner.
She says a friend at the apartment complex told her about Davion's death the night before when she got home from work, and that the police were wanting to speak with her.
She's distraught. She's confused, she's concerned, she's in disbelief still.
Honestly, it just doesn't seem real.
Can you tell us about your relationship with Davon?
There's not much to tell. We've been hanging out the past few weeks.
What Erica explained to us was that it was a short relationship. It started back in the beginning of January. She had become friendly with Mr. Hall to the point where she would go over from time to time, and their relationship started to build.
I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I liked him a lot.
She was a little hesitant. She couldn't deny the attraction.
When detectives press Erica, she adamantly denies any involvement in Davion's death. So they confront her about the argument that she allegedly had with Davon a week earlier.
Sounds like you two got pretty heated.
Well, I had to tell him something that he wasn't too happy about.
And that's when Erica drops a tantalizing new lead.
Turns out, Erica was still involved with an ex-boyfriend, 29-year-old Brian Fairweather.
Erica reveals he had been so abusive towards her and so dangerous that she had to take out an order of protection against him.
Is it possible that Brian found out about Erica's relationship with Davon and exacted his revenge?
Investigators have just learned some surprising new information in the murder of corrections officer Davon Hall. Erica Brooks, the woman Davon was dating right before his death, says her ex-boyfriend, Brian Fairweather, is still in the picture.
Erica says that she and Brian had a very complicated relationship.
It scared me.
There was a history of abuse between Brian and Erica. Erica was so fearful of Brian that she, in fact, had obtained a restraining order.
I got the restraining order in October, and I asked him to move out.
Do you think he wasn't respecting the order?
He said he wanted to get back together, but I told him I wasn't interested in that because I was seeing Davon.
However, Erica tells detectives that she was willing to try to make their split more amicable.
I agreed to remove the restraining order.
As soon as the restraining order ended, he was there knocking on Erica's door.
Gonna stay overnight?
She didn't turn him away. She let him come in and she let him spend the night. That sort of formed a uncomfortable love triangle between her, Brian, and Davon.
Davon wasn't too happy when he found out Brian was back in the picture. He was pretty mad about it. That's why we argued.
Erica, what are you doing? Everything's been going so great between us.
I know, Dave, but you have to understand, me and Brian have history.
Erica and Davon had only been dating for a few weeks, and they decided that it was best for them to part ways.
But they still saw each other around the apartment complex and remained friendly, which Erica claims didn't sit well with Brian Fairweather.
Brian didn't like it one bit. He got really, really angry and upset about it.
When Brian gets like that, you don't know what he's gonna do.
What do you mean?
According to Erica, Brian confronted Davon about the relationship.
Can I help you?
The day prior to the homicide, they had a conversation. There was some concern that things were going to escalate.
He told him in no uncertain terms that Davion was to stay far, far away from Erica.
Newsflash, we getting back together, so stay away from her. Whatever, man, you can have her.
Dave was a single man. He wasn't trying to lock nobody down. She wasn't just that one woman that he cared enough to be like, I'm gonna fight this guy about her.
Davion was just living his life. He wasn't looking for trouble. I could see him trying to walk away from an encounter with someone as opposed to, making the situation worse.
That same night, Brian was back at Erica's place.
The last time Brian had stayed over Erica's apartment was the night before the homicide.
He was still asleep when I left for work that morning and was gone when I came back.
Erica says that she hasn't seen Brian since, but they did speak on the phone after she learned of Davion's death.
Erica admitted that this phone conversation with Brian gave her a bad feeling and that he said some pretty disturbing things.
He was angry. He started talking about snitches and stitches and stuff like that. It scared me.
So do you think Brian could be responsible for what happened to Davion?
I don't know for sure Brian was involved in Davion's murder, but I think it's definitely possible.
Erica's story seems believable, but detectives also need to get Brian's side of the story, and they ask Erica to help.
One of the concerns we had when we first met with Erica was Erica truthful?
Was she really terrified of Brian? And if she was, why didn't she get another protective order?
They had to wonder if Erica was taking the focus off of herself by directing their attention to Brian.
Was Erica involved in the death of Mr. Hall?
The detectives have Erica call Brian.
When Erica tells Brian she's been talking to detectives, he appears unwilling to cooperate at first.
And he's very reluctant about coming to the police precinct.
Detectives told Erica to tell Brian it would be to his benefit to come in willingly.
Listen, Brian, you're just gonna make things more difficult for you if you refuse to speak with him.
Okay.
Eventually, Brian agrees.
Ultimately, I was able to meet with Brian, who voluntarily came to our police department where he spoke to us.
Detectives noticed that Brian does fit the height and build of one of the men from the surveillance video from outside of Davion's apartment.
But Brian denies having anything to do with Davion's death.
I wasn't involved in that whatsoever.
He admits that he and Davion had a discussion about Erica, but says it wasn't a big deal.
He tells police it wasn't a heated argument. Brian explained to Davion how he was rekindling his relationship with Erica, and he says Davion agreed to back off.
Listen, we were talking, and everything was cool.
He denies that he got angry, but we felt there was definitely some type of conflict that took place.
I wasn't even there that morning.
Well, Erica said that you were.
He was still asleep when I left for work that morning.
According to Erica, Brian had spent the night and was still there when she left for work the following morning.
I left pretty soon after she did, so she didn't see me leave.
His story just isn't really adding up, and he seemed to have a motive for wanting to harm Davion.
Brian Fairweather becomes immediately the #1 suspect in this case.
However, detectives will need more than mere suspicion to prove their hunch correct.
They didn't really have any solid evidence against him aside from Erica's statement.
Investigators are forced to let Brian go for the time being.
They needed to find proof that he was one of the men in the surveillance video.
But as detectives continue building their case against Brian, a young man comes forward who changes the entire course of the investigation.
My name is Jermaine Smalls.
He said he had some information that he thought was relevant to the investigation.
Come on in, Jermaine. Have a seat, please.
According to Jermaine, a friend of his made a shocking confession 3 days ago.
his friend told him that he had been involved in the murder of a corrections officer.
That friend was 21-year-old O'Keefe Sinclair.
But who is O'Keefe Sinclair? And why would he want Davion dead?
They were just beginning to unravel what really happened to Davion Hall.
Florida police investigating the murder of 40-year-old Davion Hall now have a new suspect in their crosshairs, 21-year-old O'Keefe Sinclair.
O'Keefe's friend, Jermaine Smalls, told police that O'Keefe actually confessed to him about killing a corrections officer one day after Davion's body was discovered.
But what is O'Keefe's connection to Davion? And why would he want him dead?
Jermaine says O'Keefe and Davion lived in the same apartment complex, but he really doesn't know much more about what happened.
It's O'Keefe, and he lives in apartment 3B.
Detectives know they need to speak with O'Keefe immediately. After wrapping things up with Jermaine, they track O'Keefe down and bring him in for questioning.
I was able to meet with Mr. Sinclair, who voluntarily came to our police department.
At first, O'Keefe denied any culpability into knowing anything that happened to Davion.
I really don't even know the guy. I just saw him around the complex sometimes.
But when detectives confront O'Keefe with what his friend Jermaine told them, he starts to change his story.
Okay, yeah, I was there. But I swear I just thought we were gonna steal the guns and go.
According to O'Keefe, the whole thing wasn't even his idea.
O'Keefe claims he was just helping out an old friend, 29-year-old Brian Fairweather.
Detectives perk up at the mention of the name Brian Fairweather. They suspected Brian's involvement in Davion's death since speaking with his ex-girlfriend, Erica Brooks.
According to O'Keefe, Brian had originally come to him about a plan to make some quick cash.
He knew that Davion had an extensive stash of guns at his apartment, and O'Keefe had recently fallen on hard times.
O'Keefe was struggling to make rent and running the risk of becoming homeless, so he agreed to Brian's plan of robbing Davion.
I was just really desperate at the time, and it seemed like an easy way to make some money.
They went there that morning to steal the guns. Their intention was to break into the apartment, but when they got there, they found that the door was already unlocked.
But O'Keefe says after collecting Davion's gun stash, Brian wasn't ready to leave just yet.
Brian changed the plans, and instead of just stealing the guns and leaving, he wanted to wait for Davion to come home.
Let's go.
Why did Brian want to wait in the house for Davion?
To confront him.
About what?
I honestly don't know. He didn't say.
O'Keefe says the whole thing was starting to make him uneasy.
After they had grabbed all the guns, he decided to go outside and act as a lookout.
O'Keefe tells detectives that just a few minutes later, Davion returned.
He watched Davion go inside the apartment.
And according to O'Keefe, he heard gunshots ring out seconds later.
O'Keefe claims this startled him, and he ran back towards the apartment to see what happened.
Davion was on the floor dead, and Brian was trying to clean up.
Well, man, just help me.
O'Keefe admits that he started helping Brian try and cover up their tracks.
They used bleach they found in the home to scrub all fingerprints.
Come on, come on, come on, come on.
After that, they took the guns and left.
O'Keefe said Brian had a contact to sell the guns to, but he doesn't know the guy.
And you didn't think to ask what was going on inside while you were waiting and why Davion was laying on the floor?
No. It all just happened so fast. But it's clear to me that Brian was the one who shot Davion.
According to O'Keefe, he actually sold a .38 revolver to Brian a few months earlier, and he suspects that's the gun Brian used to shoot Davion.
This matched up with the bullets that had been taken from Davion's body.
Since revolvers aren't the loudest guns out there, this might account for why no one else in the complex reported hearing anything.
But can detectives really trust O'Keefe's account? Whether he fired the fatal shots that killed Davon or not, O'Keefe is still culpable in the murder and cover-up.
They go ahead and place O'Keefe under arrest and prepare to bring Brian Fairweather in for another round of questioning.
Before taking Brian into custody, detectives decide they need a little more ammo against him.
They decided to subpoena his phone records.
What the police find from the phone records is that the two men texted and called each other 49 times on the day that Davon was killed.
GPS records from their phones also put both men in the apartment complex right around the time of the murder.
Detectives also speak with another resident of Davon's apartment complex who confirms seeing Brian there that day and says he was wearing a black hoodie.
That would be consistent with the surveillance video of the two men walking toward Davon's apartment.
Not to mention that Erica had said that Brian was there that morning when she left for work.
With this arsenal of new evidence in tow, detectives sit down with Brian Fairweather a second time.
Okay, Brian, we've spoken with O'Keefe Sinclair, and he told us everything. He's claiming that you are the one that shot Davon Hall.
What?
But Brian isn't budging.
Even when they present Brian with the evidence proving he was at the complex the morning of the murder, he still denies everything.
Listen, I had nothing to do with this, all right? O'Keefe shot Davon, and he's trying to blame it on me.
Despite Brian's accusations, police have what they need to charge him with first-degree murder. But with neither Brian Fairweather nor O'Keefe Sinclair copping to the crime, will Davon Hall's killer ever be brought to justice?
It still wasn't entirely clear which man fired the fatal shots that killed Davon.
Prosecutors had a long road ahead of them.
In the spring of 2016, police have charged Brian Fairweather and O'Keefe Sinclair with first-degree murder for the shooting death of 40-year-old corrections officer Davon Hall.
Sinclair says that all of this was Brian's idea. He said that Brian approached him about breaking into the apartment.
Seemed like an easy way to make some money.
According to O'Keefe, Brian was the one who shot Davon.
I had nothing to do with this, all right?
However, Brian continues to deny any involvement in the crime.
Brian said O'Keefe must have been the one who killed Davon and is trying to pin it on him.
With neither of the men fessing up, it's now up to investigators to try to determine what really happened that fateful afternoon.
Can I help you?
Investigators believe that Brian Fairweather was angry about the fact that Davon was trying to have a relationship with Erica, who he was trying to reestablish a relationship with.
They surmise Brian lured O'Keefe into helping him teach Davon a lesson with the promise of making money off the stolen guns.
When Davon returned home from the gym that afternoon, one of the two men fired the fatal shots.
Investigators couldn't say for sure which one of them did it, but it still made both of them culpable in what happened.
After Davon was dead, investigators believe Brian and O'Keefe worked together to clean up the apartment.
They then grabbed the guns from Davon's collection and fled the scene.
But as prosecutors prepare to argue this theory at trial, they receive word from Brian's attorney that he'd like to speak with them.
So Brian met with the state attorney as well as with his legal team, and it was decided at that time that Brian was going to cooperate in the investigation.
Brian finally admits to his involvement in Davon Hall's death.
I didn't kill him.
But claims he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger.
In cases like this, where there's no real damning evidence against one suspect or another, sometimes prosecutors have to make deals like this in order to get any kind of conviction.
Brian revealed to us that Mr. Sinclair was the gunman. He was the individual that pulled the trigger.
For Brian's cooperation, the prosecutors agreed to let Brian plead to the lesser charge of manslaughter and drop the first-degree murder charge.
In consultation with Mr. Fairweather's legal team, it was agreed upon that he was going to receive 9 years in state prison with his cooperation.
The state attorney had a discussion with me, and she said because they don't have any strong evidence on Brian, they will have to do a plea bargain, because it's better to do that than for him to just go and set free. So I said, that's fine with me.
I'm not satisfied with the sentence for him. It doesn't bring Dave back. He gets out, Dave is not here any longer.
With Brian Fairweather's cooperation, prosecutors feel more confident securing a conviction against O'Keefe Sinclair.
Prosecutors' game plan is to present the jury with Brian's version of events.
But O'Keefe's defense team argues that Brian's testimony shouldn't be believed.
The defense tries to convince the jury that it was really Brian who was the mastermind behind this entire crime.
The defense team says he's the one who pulled the trigger.
The trial is an ordeal for Davion's family and friends.
It was just painful to be there with his mom, because some of the photos, the pictures that were shown, it was the first time that she was seeing. First time she knew exactly where he was shot. Those pictures were so vivid. And to sit there and have to live through that was really agonizing.
Even worse is when the prosecution plays a recording of the 911 call.
I was the one who called 911, and of course I hadn't heard the tape until in the courtroom. And everyone was crying when they heard me screaming and saying, I think my son is dead.
The sheer agony in her voice, like you could hear the pain. It moved a lot of people in that courtroom to tears.
One person in the courtroom has no reaction. O'Keefe Sinclair.
He had a very flat affect throughout most of the trial. He was pretty cold.
He remains unemotional when the verdict is announced. The jury sides with the prosecution.
Sinclair is found guilty of first-degree murder.
Mr. Sinclair was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
As for Brian Fairweather, he's set to be released in 2024. After serving his sentence, he'll be deported.
Brian is a native of Jamaica. He has some immigration issues.
Even with the deportation, Davion's friends and family feel Brian got off too easy.
I'm disappointed because I believe this entire situation, he's the brain behind why all of this occurred. Whether he pulled the trigger or not, he was there.
For Davion's friends and family, no punishment can make up for the loss of their loved one.
The ultimate justice would have been my brother being alive, and nothing can change that.
I had to come to a place where I had to consciously say to myself, let it go, forgive them. That is what Dave would like to see.
Davion Hall was a wonderful man. And it's not just his immediate circle that will miss him. The effects of his death have a ripple effect throughout the whole community.
Here he still has a legacy. We're going to continue to carry that.
In fact, Davion's mother has created a foundation to keep that legacy alive.
The Davion L. Hall Foundation was created to continue his passion of serving his community through the mentorship of at-risk youth.
It's about fostering the right environment so young men can learn and grow and become the men that we need them to become.
If I can just touch one life at a time, and that's my goal and my vision. Save one child, because I'm sure if O'Keefe had something like this and he was willing to be a good steward, he wouldn't have taken my son's life.